Hi, I'm Dr. Jarek Conrad. Welcome to Healthy and Black, where I share information about the state of health for Black America across 7 categories, from emotional health to physical health. I became plant-based over 15 years ago after losing so many of my family members to chronic health issues. Now I want to help you take control of your health. All right, here we go. Hello, everyone. This is episode number 1. Episode number 1 of Healthy and Black. I'm glad to get to this point. Have a lot of stuff I want to try to talk about, but I realize it's only episode number 1. And so my plan today is to do a little bit more of an introduction, tell you kind of who I am, for those of you who might not know me. Although it's episode 1, so you probably know who I am if you're watching this at this point. But maybe you'll learn something new. So I'll tell you a little bit about who I am, and why I think it's so important to launch this podcast, and what I hope to accomplish, or better yet, what I hope to help you accomplish over the course of this podcast. So let's start with that. Let's start with a little bit more about who I am. I am a husband of 24 years now. I have 2 middle schoolers, one in the 5th grade, one in the 8th grade. I cannot believe how quickly time is flying by. My wife is a labor and employment attorney, which is kind of nice because I've spent 26 years in and around HR. And so, we have some interesting conversations, looking at issues from her perspective as a labor and employment lawyer, and then my perspective as an HR person. We've had some interesting stories to share over the years. So again, I've been in HR, I should say in and around HR for a long time. I say in and around HR. I've held, numerous positions in organizations, both large and small, public sector, private sector, just numerous positions in human resources. But I've also held various positions outside of HR, but still they touched on HR in some way. So, for instance, my last position was at UKG, an HR software and workforce management provider, about a $5.8 billion company, so a big company. I led the thought leadership team there, meaning that at any given time, either I or somebody else on my team was somewhere in the country on the stage, or a guest on somebody's podcast, or hold up somewhere writing about the workplace, the future of work, the present of work, challenges organizations are dealing with, and making recommendations on how organizations can overcome those challenges. I also served as the executive director of the company's think tank, where we publish research. We empirically looked at some of the things that were going on and tried to make evidence based recommendations on what organizations should do. But now I'm back doing my own thing, which I did really prior to going to UKG. They were a client of mine, and now I'm back doing my own thing. Human Like Me is the name of my business, and I'm doing keynote speaking, executive coaching, leadership development stuff. Really the same stuff that I was doing before UKG and at UKG, but I'm now just doing it for myself now. So excited about that. And it really opened up an opportunity for me to start this podcast. I have been threatening to do a podcast now for probably several years, and now I can go ahead and commit to that. So that's a little bit about me. I'm going to give you more details in a few minutes, but I do want to get serious for a moment and talk about why I'm starting the podcast. So, I always say there's no secret that Black people are struggling in terms of health and wellness in America. You name the category, and we're probably disproportionately struggling in that category. So, I have a model that I've put together, 7 dimensions of health. And over the course of our podcast episodes, we're going to talk about these dimensions of health. Sometimes we'll focus on just one of them. Sometimes we'll talk about more than one in the same episode because, as you might imagine, they're all interlocked. So I'm really looking forward to that. Sometimes I'll be by myself if I feel like, I got enough expertise to talk about this, or at least enough life experience to talk about kind of what I did, or my view. Uh, but mostly I'm going to bring on experts, people who do this every day, I realize in our society now, expertise, people who have degrees and certifications and experience doing the things they talk about doesn't hold as much weight with some people. It still holds a lot of weight with me. So I'm going to try to bring you people who are telling you the best of the information that we have to date. And when I suggest something, it's going to be based on the evidence that we know to date. I still believe in science. I still believe in facts. I still believe in expertise. So much so that I invested my time to go back and get certifications and degrees and yeah, I just wanted to make sure that I'm not leading anybody astray in any way. So we're gonna have experts as guests on the show. So I started it because we're struggling, and it gets really personal for me. I'm from East St. Louis, Illinois, and I'll give a little bit more about East St. Louis and growing up there, what that experience was like, and then how that shaped my mindset. Because I really think that mindset is something that I'm hoping to pass on to other people from a family perspective, from a personal perspective. Back in 2001, March 4th, I get a phone call from 618. So I was living in Florida at the time, and 618, I know it's somebody calling from home. And my sister, who had been battling cancer for a long time, I had a feeling that is what that call was about. I had recently seen her and knew that it probably wasn't going to be very long. And indeed, March 4th, she passed away. Rita Ladybug, everybody called her Ladybug. Most people didn't know her real name. Rita Ladybug Red. She was only 35 years old. Now, at 35 years old, she had already lost several of her friends to cancer. So that starts to tell you something's not right when you got young people passing away of, something like cancer. So that was the first of these calls. November 22nd of that same year, I get a phone call that my father passed away, Edward L. Conrad. He was 58 years old. So you notice the two different last names? So my siblings were all a product of my mother's first marriage, and then I was the only child in my mother's second marriage. Now, for a long time, I never heard the concept of a half brother, half sister because we've always lived together. So we never treated each other like half anything. These were my siblings my whole life. And so that's my sister. There's my father. February 24th, 2007, I get the phone call again. Chandra, we all called her Tisha Red, 47 years old, heart issue. She's gone. March 10th, 2019, I get the phone call that my brother, Ortega Buster, is what we called him. Yeah, I guess it's spelled Buster, so it's supposed to be Buster, but Buster. That's what we called him. He was 57 years old, prostate cancer. April 19th, 2020 was the big one. This is when my mother passed away. Now, she was 85 years old. She lived a long life, especially compared to my other relatives. I mean, but the sad part about that was at 85, she had already buried 3 of her kids. And that's not supposed to happen. It's not supposed to work that way. She was tough as nails, but she had Alzheimer's for quite a while, and she finally succumbed to that. In fact, the last time I saw her was right at the beginning of the pandemic. I was at the nursing home to visit her. We had just transferred her from a hospital back to the nursing home, and that was the day they shut down the nursing home. So I wasn't able to go in the nursing home with her. So I kind of said my goodbyes to her in the parking lot. And I knew at that time that was probably the last time I was going to see her alive. And so that was in 2020, June 25th of 23. This was the final blow for my immediate family. My sister, Jessica Poo Poo, is what we called her. Red passed away at 65 years old. Again, I had recently seen her and knew that her health was on decline. She was my last remaining sibling, the last person in my immediate family. So all sisters and brothers, mother, father, everybody's gone. I'm not counting aunts and uncles and cousins and all that stuff. It's just I got those phone I used to get that phone call and I would see 618 on my phone and I would have to brace myself before I answered it because I had gotten programmed that this was going to be bad news. And so it's just a difficult stretch to have to deal with all that. They all passed away of chronic health issues. Now, you might have heard of East St. Louis's reputation at, violent crimes and all this and all that, but it wasn't the violent crimes that got us. It was health issues that were a combination of lifestyle and a combination of being born in a place that, just was a toxic environment. And again, I'll talk about that a little bit more. But I said all that just for you to know that this is critically important to me. I couldn't save my family members, but maybe I can save you. Maybe I can help you save your family members. That is how serious this is. Not a cute, it'd be nice if we lose a couple pounds. And this is not what this is about. This is about trying to help us stave off or even in some cases reverse chronic health issues that are plaguing our community. So, what do I hope to accomplish? So, again, I hope to inform you, help educate you on what the best information is out there. I know information is coming from every direction, and sometimes that information is conflicting. But the reality is, not much has changed regarding what we need to do to stay healthy. If you go back to 1950 to today, um, the basics are the basics. We need to exercise, we need to sleep, we need to eat well, and we need to find a way to manage our stress. So that formula, those elements, it's the same. Now, I know it's not always easy to execute on strategies that you put together. And so we'll spend our time talking about how to make these things really happen for you. But I'm not going to offer any magic pills or exotic potions or some miracle cure that we just read about that only one or two people in the world know about. That stuff doesn't exist. It doesn't. And you don't need all that. We have the things that we need to take care of ourselves. Look, I was very skinny. Most of my life, I was so thin that was the thing that everybody would tease me about. And I thought, if you're skinny, you're healthy. And so, though I had all these things going on with my family, I could eat a Snicker bar in the morning time and wouldn't gain any weight. Felt like I could do anything. But the reality is, once I left graduate school, got settled in my career, and started to go to the doctor on a regular basis to get physicals and all that, we found out that my cholesterol was 299. So it's right there knocking on the door of 300. And he immediately put me on a statin, which I didn't want to be on any medication. The statin brought me down to about 175 or so, I think. And I wanted to know, what could I do? What if I started eating differently? Would that affect these numbers? And I ended up going 100% plant-based. First, we still did fish for a little bit, so we were pescatarian for a couple years. This was 15 years ago, but my cholesterol went down to 155, I think it was. And so it almost went in half based on my eating did better than what the medication did. So I was convinced that, look, there's something to this. And so I went out, got certifications in plant-based nutrition and weight management, got a personal training certification. And all of it was just so that I could understand this stuff for me and my family, that I could know the science behind all of it. And again, this was after starting to get these phone calls and realizing, look, if my numbers are bad, what makes me think that I'm not going to have some long-term issues as well if all my family are having long-term issues? So I got to do what I can to stave off these chronic health issues for as long as I can. So that's how I am. Look, if I realize that something is good for me and something is really bad for me, I'm not trying to learn from my own mistakes. I'm not trying to have the negative outcome and then I make a change. I'm trying to learn from what's going on around me. So if person X does Y and has a negative result, I'm not trying to do Y. I don't need to do Y to, oh, yeah, it happened to me too. It's going to happen to me too. Now, I realize everybody's not like me. I'm a cold turkey kind of person. I can turn it off and I'm done with it. So I realize that there's some of you out there like that. and I'm going to give you the information that you need to go ahead and turn that key and be done with it. But I know most people are not like that. So I get that. I understand that. I empathize with that. And I'm going to try to give you the tools that you need to slowly turn that key. And I'm going to be pushing at you to turn it as fast as you can, but we'll get there. So that's the deal. That's why I'm starting this. I've experienced some of these issues. I was in a couple documentaries. I led a clinical trial at the Mayo Clinic where we educated people about both emotional intelligence and plant-based nutrition. I have stood on the stage with, at this point, hundreds of audiences, thousands of people talking about issues such as health and wellness. I mean, this is one of the most important issues that I talk about. And people have always said, man, you gotta start a podcast. More people need to hear this. So here you are. Here is the podcast. So that's the plan. Now I mentioned that I was going to talk a little bit more about my background. The reason that I'm choosing the Black population specifically to focus on is that so many of us end up in the same kind of situation. Not only are we having these lousy outcomes, but some of our experiences are the same. Many of us grew up, not all of us, thankfully, and those numbers are changing, but too many of us grew up in challenging environments like the environment I grew up in East St. Louis. Now, before I go too far, some of the greatest people that have impacted my life are from East St. Louis. So I'm not going to knock East St. Louis at all. It's my hometown. Go class of 90 Tigers, but it's a community that's experienced its share of challenges. I mentioned being a toxic environment. Literally, we have chemical companies that have had spills and these environmental toxins that we shouldn't be breathing. A lot of us, like I did, grew up with childhood asthma as a result of the kind of things we get exposed to. And then the stress levels are toxic. Anytime you're in an environment with high poverty, high crime, that's not a healthy environment for you. And the brain releases stress hormones and it has an effect. And then just being a Black person in America, whether you're in East St. Louis or City X, wherever it is, there is well documented stress and trauma that many of us have experienced or continue to experience on a regular basis. There's vicarious traumatization that if somebody who looks like me is experiencing something, I feel that, right? There are a whole host of different traumas, again, that have been well documented. I wrote my first book, I think it's behind me over here, called The Fragile Mind, where I went in detail about what I call persistent traumatic stress, being constantly exposed to the kinds of traumas that soldiers in a war zone might experience. Now, people might think, oh, he's exaggerating. No, what's the difference between getting shot at in a war zone and getting shot at in a place like East St. Louis? Your brain is going through the same processes. Look, somebody got shot in my house where I got to get up and run out. When I went to school, I think I was in high school at the time. When I went to school that Monday, nobody knew what I had experienced, and I'm still expected to do well. And from an academic standpoint, put that behind me. So we'll go through in this podcast, we'll talk about what some of those traumas are. And I know when I titled this Healthy and Black, I had a whole lot of my white friends and colleagues like, I can't wait. I'm like, it's Healthy and Black. But the reality is I am glad and I hope they do tune in because number one, the advice that I give really, it can apply to anybody. So anybody can get something out of it. But the other thing it's good to be aware of what your colleagues, your coworkers, people who you might love, your spouses, people in your life that might have come up in a similar background. It's good to be aware of what that might be like to be able to empathize with that. So we will talk about growing up in a place like that. I mentioned that it affected my mindset as a very young person for as long as I can remember. I had questions about why are certain people living a certain way? Like, why does my community look like this? When I look at TV, they're living differently. What is that? Why do some people seem to have my future already figured out, that they've written me off already because I'm a young Black male growing up here? I had questions about that and I rebelled against that. I didn't want that for me. I refused to accept that. And I didn't know what that was in me that said that I'm going to do something different. One of these days, I'll tell a story about one of my friends came over and it was probably 100 degrees outside. And we don't have air and stuff. So we got the fan up. The fan is turned backwards, trying to get the hot air out. And I'm laying up and I'm miserable. And he walked in and I think I just had on my underwear. I'm laying in the bed. I'm sweating. I'm he walked in the house. He's, man, you look miserable. What, yeah. And I looked right at him and I said, I tell you what, I'm never going to live like this. I was like, I can't wait to go to school and to get out of here because this is never going to happen to me. I'm not going to be like this. He tells that story to this day about how serious I was about that and that look in my eyes. He said he knew I meant it and I meant it. Some people say, "Oh, I grew up poor, but nobody had anything, so it was fine. We had each other and we were creative." Listen, I knew that I was poor. Poverty, I wrote in my book, was like an everyday intrusion. I didn't just want what people around me had. I wanted what people on TV had. What makes them better than me? So that started to shape my mindset, my questions about issues related to diversity and differences. I went to college at the University of Illinois on an engineering scholarship. Late, I think my junior year, I changed my major because I knew I wanted to go into HR instead of engineering. There's a story behind that I'll tell one day. But I ended up going to graduate school at Cornell in Ithaca for industrial and labor relations, which is human resources management. And while I was there, people would say, well, HR people are weak on business skills. They don't have business acumen. So I enrolled in a business school and got an MBA at the same time. All the while in the background, I'm still dealing with issues of human differences. I'm giving speeches, I'm writing things, I'm exploring topics, trying to understand these differences and issues of poverty. And all this stuff is still really important to me. And I would get this question all the time: how did you make it out of the challenging situation you grew up in? I didn't have a real answer. I have guesses. Well, my mother really pushed me, and I had all kind of guesses. It wasn't until I left graduate school, got started in my career, and I ran across some articles by Daniel Goleman about emotional intelligence. I was like, that's it. I think that's the thing. I went and got some assessments in EI, had above average emotional intelligence, and I was hooked ever since. So now I felt like I had an answer to this question when people ask, well, why did you make it out? I really feel EI was a big part of it. Now, what emotional intelligence I guess it's the intelligent use of emotions, right? It is the ability to understand how you're feeling at any given time and redirect your emotions, not let your emotions take advantage of you, not let your emotions force you into bad decisions, being able to process them effectively and react to situations. The other thing is being able to read situations and read other people and kind of understand where they're coming from and react to them in an appropriate manner. So it includes things like stress management, interpersonal skills, optimism, impulse control. All these are aspects of emotional intelligence. So look, oh man, that's been 30 years ago. And I have been talking about EI ever since. It's been the foundation, both when I worked inside of corporate America, it's been the foundation for the work that I've done. And certainly as an executive coach and leadership trainer and keynote speaker, it's been the foundation of what I've worked on. It is the foundation for how I think about health and wellness. If we can help people manage their emotions more effectively, they're less likely to make decisions about putting things in their bodies that they know are not good for them in the long run. And so that'll be a constant theme throughout this podcast. And what are some tips and tools that I can give people to help them from an emotional standpoint? So, left the graduate school, started my career in HR. I knew early on that I wanted to be on my own, and I thought I was too young for anybody to take credibly, to listen to. So I enrolled in a doctoral program, ended up getting a doctorate degree, spent really that entire 5, 6 years focused on emotional intelligence, writing different papers, looking at EI from one aspect or another. In fact, my dissertation looked at the relationship between emotional intelligence and intercultural sensitivity, because I thought somebody who had a higher degree of emotional intelligence probably did better with this whole thing we call diversity. Interesting findings there. I'll talk about one day. So that was it. I started my own thing, and I would get pulled to do other projects, run a strategic plan for the city of Jacksonville, run HR for the city of Jacksonville. And then I got pulled in again by one of my clients, my best client. It was Ultimate Software at the time. They created a role that they thought was great for me, and ended up going back in house and staying for 7 years. And I'm really excited now to be back doing my own thing, so I can talk to you. So it's a little bit of a career background. I think I got all the certifications. I was able to squeeze all those in. I talked about the trial and the fact that I've been in a couple documentaries. Eating You Alive is one of them. If you haven't seen that, I got a little cameo in Eating You Alive. You might don't blink or you might miss it, but I'm in there. I'm in there. I do want to lay a little bit of groundwork before we wrap up this first episode in terms of where we are as Black Americans, like the state of health, where we are today across these 7 categories. So, this first category, physical health, 6 in 10 Americans live with at least one chronic health condition. So, we're talking about things like heart disease, stroke, cancer, diabetes. 6 in 10. That's all Americans. It's worse for us. I'll get into that. Emotional health. Unfortunately, emotional intelligence has been going down. A most recent study that I saw was in 2022. It looked over a 4-year time period, and the global scores in emotional intelligence have gone down. From a family health standpoint, category number 3, 41% of women and 26% of men have said that they've experienced some kind of sexual violence, physical violence, or stalking by an intimate partner during their lifetime. So that's this family health category is important. If you're going through a bit of divorce or something like that's going to impact your health. Social health. Now, I know some people like, oh, I don't need nobody. I'm okay by myself. The research suggests otherwise. The research suggests that a lack of strong relationships increase the risk of premature death from all causes by up to 50%. So this is equivalent to smoking like 15 cigarettes a day. So relationships are critical. It's like healthy, maybe one of the most healthy things that we can have. Financial health is another category. Unfortunately, 73% of Americans still rank finances as their most significant source of stress. I get it. I understand that. Professional health. More than half of workers, 53% of employees worldwide, say that if I could do it over again, I would choose a different profession. It ain't working for me. We know employee engagement numbers are down. And I say they're down. They've actually gone up to 23%. That's as high as we get. It's most people are not engaged at work. So that was professional health. This last category, mental health. The good news is that there's less of a stigma associated with mental health. We're talking about it more. The bad news is that more of us are struggling. So at any given time, there's a certain percentage of the population, 25% or so of the population is dealing with some kind of significant mental health issue. And over the course of our lifetimes, 46% of us will have some kind of mental illness. So that's almost half of us. So it's incredible to think that something almost half of us will experience still has a stigma. The other thing I mentioned that EQ scores are going down. IQ scores are going down as well. So the last study I saw said that over a 13-year span, IQ scores have gone down like 30 points. So we'll talk about what's behind some of these numbers that we're seeing in future episodes. And we'll try to look, we know that there are structural issues behind all this stuff. And we'll talk about these structural issues. And I think we still need to be working. I mean, when I'm not on the podcast, I am working on these structural issues. How can we change the reality for the masses? But for the purposes of this podcast, we got to focus on what we can control. We can't change the structures. We can't change the redlining that caused us to live in certain neighborhoods, and those neighborhoods became food deserts. And that's something that we got to work on. We got to press our legislators and all that kind of stuff to work on. But what I'm focused on is, despite those circumstances, what can we do what can we control? And so that's what my focus is going to be. So that's it. That's it. That's an overview of who we are, what this podcast will be about. I am delighted that you joined me for the first one. You should write it down. What if this thing becomes famous, right? You want to say, hey, I was there on that first episode. Tell your friends about it. I'd also recommend listening with your family because it's difficult when you're trying to make changes and you're the only one in your family. If your spouse is not on board, you're trying to eat healthy and they deep frying everything, it's going to be tough, right? And so I would encourage you to bring your family members, even your little ones, young kids. I'm not going to be cursing and looking for drop the mic kind of moments. That's not what I'm about. Everything I'm talking about, stuff I talk to my kids about, feel free to invite yours. I'm looking forward to this. My plan is to start off maybe on a every couple week basis on a podcast. And if we can get some momentum, maybe we can move to a weekly basis. Now, I have a lot to talk about. I could probably sit here and do 12 hours worth of material now, but we're going to make sure that that we line up the guests and we spend some time researching what the latest information is out there before we present it to you. Okay. Any questions, reach out to me at jarekconrad.com. Learn a little bit more about me, what I do when I'm not on the podcast at jarekconrad.com. Again, thank you so much for tuning in to episode 1. I look forward to seeing you on future episodes. But until then, don't let culture, cost, or convenience ruin your health. Thanks for joining me for this episode of Healthy and Black. I'm your host, Dr. Jarek Conrad. If you have feedback on today's episode, please email info@jarekconrad.com. I'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to visit jarekconrad.com to subscribe to my blog. Thanks for listening. Please tell your friends about the podcast. Until next time, don't let culture, cost, or convenience ruin your health.